Whether you're new to the hobby or you've been painting for years, understanding brushes and how we think about them can have a huge impact on the choices we make. So in this video I want to share the things I've learned over the years and what I think is genuinely more important when it comes to brushes. I'm not here to suggest brands or tell you what you should be using, just the things that really matter regardless. Simple, practical advice that can help you choose the right brushes, look after them and get the most out of them. Welcome to TableTopReady, my name's Michael, and in this video I want to talk about brushes because I get asked about them all the time. And now that I've had a chance to really think about it, I want to share with you what I think is most important about them. The first thing you need to know about brushes is everyone has an opinion, especially if you spend any time online. But these opinions come from that person's perspective and often what they've heard or seen secondhand. That's why I've stopped treating people's opinions as advice and instead started exploring for myself, and honestly I think you should do the same. Try things, see what actually works for you, because not everyone paints the same way. Recommendations are great, they're how we discover new tools and products that might genuinely help. But never feel like you've got the wrong brushes, or that you have to use what everyone else is using. The best brush is the one that works for you. There are some really fancy, high quality paintbrushes that we can spend a lot of money on, but that doesn't mean they're going to make you better at painting. There's no substitute for practice and actually spending time painting and improving brush control and hand-eye coordination. I stopped buying expensive brushes because they still had the same issues a reasonably priced brush had. They still split and lost their points at the worst time. Fancy brushes are great and they definitely help, to an extent, but they're not a shortcut to good results. The biggest improvement always comes from you and the time you put in. I achieve great results with brushes that most people would avoid, and the truth is that a fancy brush used by someone who hasn't learnt to use it is a wasted brush in my opinion. Something I wish I understood earlier is that the type of painter you are should influence the brushes you buy. Not everyone paints the same way. Some people are rough and ready and others are extremely controlled, taking the time really focusing on the more fancy techniques, and then there are those who sit somewhere in the middle. Your painting style has a huge impact on your brushes. If you paint more rough and ready like I do and prefer a more efficient approach to getting a larger collection of miniatures painted, then your brushes are going to take more abuse and it's not as important to have fancy brushes. But if you're a more controlled painter and like to take their time on individual miniatures and projects, then you do want a brush that is more precise and able to let you work at your best ability. Once you understand the kind of painter you are or the kind of painter you want to be, choosing brushes becomes a lot easier. You stop chasing the perfect brush and start choosing the ones that generally fit how you naturally paint. I've seen a lot of people, especially newer painters in the hobby, using only one brush for everything, which does seem pretty reasonable, but when you think of what you're putting that brush through, it becomes obvious you're going to need more. We can't expect a single brush to handle base coats, washes and shades, building up layers, maybe even the odd bit of dry brushing, and then still perform perfectly for precise tasks like small details and highlights. It's just too much for one brush to cope with, and certainly won't last very long. That's why I suggest investing in a small variety of brushes to share the load, and also means each brush will perform better at those tasks you need it for, and more importantly they'll last a lot longer. You can even start out with a free brush setup, something for your base coats, a general brush used for a variety of tasks, and a brush dedicated for detail work and highlighting. If you're someone who likes to dry brush, I would also recommend a separate brush for that as well. We need to remind ourselves that brushes are tools, they're not precious heirlooms that will last forever. In fact, they need replacing fairly often. A brush does have a lifespan, and the more you paint the faster it wears out, and that's completely normal. It doesn't matter whether it's a cheap or high-end brush, eventually they all split, lose their point and stop performing the way we want them to. I found that if we're too precious about our brushes, then we can be too scared to use them. Brushes are tools, they're there to be used, not protected like they're something sacred. And whilst we cover our special brushes, we actually continue to use our everyday reasonably priced brushes and achieve great results with those instead. Once you accept this, it completely changes how you go about buying brushes. It's less about vanity and more about being practical and productive. No matter how much you've spent or what brushes you use, it's a good idea to look after them so they perform as well as they can when needed. The first obvious thing to do is to treat them with care and paint with intention. Just slowing down a little whilst painting helps your brushes last longer. When you're taking paint from the pot or palette, try to avoid getting paint up near the ferrule. That's where it dries and causes build up and eventually makes the bristles split. When you're cleaning your brush in water, it's better to gently press the bristles against the side of your pot rather than vigorously swishing or swirling it around. To dry your brush, we can fold over our cloth or paper towel to remove excess water, rather than pushing our brush into the surface and having to twist or rotate it. And whenever I find a hair out of place or one that just isn't behaving, then I do recommend removing it with scissors or a sharp knife. Finally, store your brushes upside down. If you keep the plastic cap covers for your brushes, then let you store your brushes safely upside down whilst allowing any remaining water to run out of the bristles so they can dry properly between uses. Obviously, all these are best practice and shouldn't be seen as absolutes, and just making some of these part of your routine can have a huge difference on your brushes. Something I quickly adopted was using a brush cleaner or soap. Not every time I used them, but when I felt they needed it. Rinsing in water between colours is good enough in the short term, but over time paint starts to build up inside the bristles and near the ferrule. That's what eventually ruins the point and makes a brush more difficult to use. Using a proper brush soap every now and then helps break down that dried paint, especially if we've not been as careful with it. First, use some water to lather the soap and work it into the bristles. You can use the lid, your fingers or some paper towel. You should see it start to remove any dried paint as you work with it. Rinse the soap off in water, again just brushing the bristles against the side of the container, and repeat the process a second time or until you're happy it's clean. The soap can help remove dried paint from the ferrule as well. If you use the kind of brush soap I like to use, it also conditions our brushes, helping it to keep its shape for longer. The last thing is, I think the more experience you get, the more you realise that brushes are a really personal thing. When you're new, it's easy to look for someone to tell you exactly which brush to buy or which brand is the best, but experienced painters don't really think like that. You'll notice they rarely tell you what you should be using, because they know how much of it comes down to comfort and familiarity. Over time you do get used to the feel of a certain brush, even the size you prefer, and that becomes part of how you paint. So when you suddenly switch to a different brand or a different style, it can feel completely wrong at first. But that doesn't mean the new brush is bad, it's just different. Not all brushes are made the same, and they all have their own feel. You almost have to learn them in the same way you learned to paint in the first place. And that's why it's still good to try different brushes from time to time and keep yourself open, so you don't get complacent or stuck using only one type forever. And that's why experienced painters rarely suggest specific brush brands to people unless they gain something from it. They know what works for them might not work for someone else. So that's everything I've learned over the years. Nothing fancy, nothing complicated, just practical things that generally make a difference. And the more I paint, the more I realise that there's no perfect brush and no correct choice. There's just what works for you and what helps you enjoy the hobby more. So if you're going to take anything away from this, I hope it's that brushes aren't something to overthink, just as long as we look after them and keep painting. I want to say a massive thank you to all the amazing people who've made this video possible with their continued support. It really means a lot. Your generosity allows me to get all the paints, brushes and miniatures I need to make these tutorials so I can continue to help you get better at painting. And I especially want to thank David Dias, Martin Kitching and Clark Matner, who have recently become supporters or have donated to the channel. Thank you so much. If you enjoy the content here on TableTopReady and feel you get value from it, you can also help support the channel by becoming a channel member or joining my Patreon. You'll get access to our Discord, regular updates and early access to videos and tutorials. There are plenty of other tutorials on the channel showing you how to improve your painting skills and learn new techniques, and even how to get started painting Warhammer, so make sure to go check those out as well. I really do enjoy making these tutorials and I hope you find them useful. If you do, please leave a like and let me know in the comments. I always love hearing about your own hobby and what you thought of the video. And make sure to subscribe if you don't want to miss out on future content. Thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next video.